Grease and Betrayal, a story of family, love, and ultimate revenge. My name is Marcus Rivera, and I've spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of my father's respect. At 28 years old, I still felt like the disappointing son who could never quite measure up to Roberto Rivera's impossible standards. My father owned Rivera's Auto Repair, a small but well-regarded garage on the south side of Chicago. For 35 years, he'd built that business from nothing, working 18-hour days with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, and the smell of motor oil soaked into his clothes. To him, the shop wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, his monument to the American dream, proof that a kid from Mexico could build something lasting in this country. The problem was, I'd never been good enough to inherit that legacy. "Marcus, you're holding that wrench like it's gonna bite you," my father said, watching me struggle with a particularly stubborn bolt on a '98 Honda Civic. His voice carried that familiar note of disappointment, the same tone I'd been hearing since I was 12 years old and first started helping around the shop. "I got it, Papa," I replied, applying more pressure until my knuckles turned white. "No, you don't got it, look." He pushed me aside with calloused hands and removed the bolt in 3 quick motions. "You gotta feel the machine, understand how it wants to come apart. Metal talks to you if you listen." I've been hearing variations of this speech for 16 years. Metal talks, engines breathe, transmissions have personalities. My father spoke about cars like they were living things, and somehow I'd never learned their language. Despite growing up in the garage, despite helping him every summer and weekend since middle school, despite genuinely wanting to follow in his footsteps, I remained clumsy with tools and uncertain around engines. The worst part wasn't my lack of natural mechanical ability. The worst part was watching my father's face every time I made a mistake. He'd get this look, not anger exactly, but a deep, weary disappointment that suggested he'd given up hope that his son would ever be worthy of the Rivera name. "College boy thinks he's too good for honest work," I'd overheard him telling my Uncle Carlos one evening when I was 17. I'd come by the shop to pick up some tools and heard them talking in the office. 4 years studying business, and he still can't change oil without making a mess. That comment had cut deeper than any direct criticism. I'd gone to community college on a partial academic scholarship, working nights at a pizza place to pay for books and gas money. I'd studied business administration because I thought it might help me understand the financial side of running the shop, make myself more useful to him. Instead, he saw it as evidence that I thought I was better than him. The irony was that I'd never wanted anything more than his approval. While my high school classmates dreamed of escaping our neighborhood, I dreamed of earning the right to have Rivera and Son painted on the shop's front window. I wanted to be the son who could make him proud, who could carry on what he'd built, who could prove that his sacrifices hadn't been wasted on an ungrateful kid. But every dropped wrench, every misdiagnosed problem, every customer who had to wait longer because of my mistakes reinforced his belief that I wasn't cut out for this life. "Maybe you should think about finding something else," he'd suggested after I accidentally cross-threaded an oil drain plug, requiring him to spend 2 hours fixing my error. "There's no shame in office work, Mijo. Not everyone's meant to work with their hands." The suggestion was meant to be kind, I think, but it felt like a death sentence. If I couldn't make it in the family business, what was I supposed to do with my life? The shop was all I'd ever known, all I'd ever wanted to be part of. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. If I couldn't earn his respect as a mechanic, maybe I could earn it as a businessman. I started focusing on the detail work, washing, waxing, interior cleaning, services that required patience and attention to detail rather than mechanical expertise. I convinced my father to let me expand that side of the business, arguing that we could charge premium prices for high-quality detailing work. "Washing cars isn't a real job," he'd said dismissively. "Premium detailing can bring in more per hour than most repair work," I countered, showing him profit margin calculations I'd worked out on my laptop. He'd reluctantly agreed to let me try, probably figuring it would keep me busy and out of his way while he handled the real work. Within 6 months, I'd built up a steady clientele of customers willing to pay top dollar for meticulous detailing work. I treated every car like it was going to a show, spending hours on paint correction, leather conditioning, and engine bay cleaning. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely good at something automotive-related. Detailing required the same obsessive attention to detail that had made me a good student, the same patient perfectionism that frustrated me when working on engines, but served me well when making a car look showroom perfect. More importantly, customers started specifically requesting me. Word spread through social media about the quality of my work. I started getting calls from people with expensive cars, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche owners who'd heard about the kid at Rivera's who could make their vehicles look better than new. My father noticed the increased revenue, but he never acknowledged that it was due to my efforts. The detail bay was still just washing cars in his mind, not real automotive work. I was still the college boy playing at being useful while he handled the serious business of keeping the shop running. It was during this time, when I was finally finding my place in the automotive world, that I met Victoria Ashford. She drove into my life on a Tuesday morning in April, behind the wheel of a white BMW 5 Series that had seen better days. The car was expensive but neglected, paint oxidized from Chicago winters, leather cracked from neglect, interior cluttered with the debris of a busy professional life. Victoria herself was the opposite of her car. Even at 9 a.m. on a weekday, she looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her gray business suit was expertly tailored, and her makeup was flawless despite whatever early morning routine had brought her to a South Side auto shop. "I need a complete detail," she said, stepping carefully around a puddle of motor oil near the entrance. "Inside and out. This car is supposed to represent me professionally, and right now it's an embarrassment." I looked at the BMW more closely. It would need paint correction, probably a full day of work to bring it back to respectability. "That's going to be expensive," I warned. "Complete paint correction, leather conditioning, full interior detail. We're talking about 12 to 15 hours of work." She didn't blink. "How much?" $800. "Fine, when can you have it done?" Most customers would have negotiated, asked for a discount, or at least seemed surprised by the price. Victoria just pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "I'll need it by Friday morning. I have a client presentation, and I can't show up looking like I don't have my life together." I glanced at the card. Victoria Ashford, Senior Marketing Director, Ashford and Associates. The address was downtown, definitely not our usual neighborhood. "What brings you to the South Side?" I asked, genuinely curious. Our shop served mostly working-class customers who brought their cars to Roberto because he was honest, affordable, and good at what he did. We rarely saw luxury vehicles, and we never saw downtown professionals. "My regular place couldn't fit me in until next week," she explained, already pulling out her phone to check messages. "I Googled car detailing Chicago and your shop had good reviews. Plus, you were the only place that answered the phone before 10 a.m. She was already distracted, fingers flying over her phone screen as she responded to what were probably urgent work emails. I found myself studying her profile, sharp cheekbones, focused expression, the kind of confident energy that comes from being very good at what you do. "I'll need a way to contact you when it's ready," I said. She looked up from her phone, and for the first time, really looked at me. I was suddenly conscious of the grease stains on my shirt, the motor oil under my fingernails, the fact that I probably smelled like WD-40 and tire cleaner. But instead of the dismissive look I expected, she smiled. "Sorry, I'm being rude. I'm Victoria." She extended a manicured hand. Marcus, I replied, shaking her hand and trying not to transfer any automotive grime to her perfect skin. Marcus Rivera, she asked, reading the name embroidered on my work shirt. That's right. So this is your shop. My father's shop. I just handle the detailing. Something in my voice must have revealed more than I intended, because her expression softened slightly. Well, based on the reviews, you handle it very well. Over the next 4 days, I put more effort into that BMW than I'd ever put into any single vehicle. I started with a thorough wash to remove surface dirt, then began the painstaking process of paint correction. Using progressively finer compounds and polishes, I worked section by section to remove swirl marks, water spots, and the dull oxidation that had robbed the white paint of its luster. The interior required equal attention. The leather seats needed deep cleaning followed by conditioning to restore their suppleness. I shampooed the carpets twice, detailed every plastic surface, and even removed the air vents to clean them individually. My father watched me work with bemused tolerance. "You're spending more time on that car than we charge for," he observed. "I want it to be perfect," I replied, not looking up from the intricate work of cleaning the gear shifter assembly. "Why, it's just another customer." I couldn't explain to him that this wasn't just another customer. Victoria represented something I'd never encountered before, success on a level I could barely imagine, confidence I'd never possessed, a world where people paid $800 for car detailing without blinking. I wanted to prove to her, and maybe to myself, that I could deliver work worthy of that world. When Victoria returned Friday morning to pick up her car, the transformation was dramatic. The BMW gleamed like it had just left the factory floor. Every surface had been cleaned, polished, and protected. Even the engine bay looked better than it had when the car was new. Victoria circled the car slowly, running her hand along the paint, inspecting the interior with obvious surprise. "This is incredible," she said finally. "I honestly didn't think it could look this good again." "I guarantee all my work," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the pride swelling in my chest. "If you're not completely satisfied—" "Are you kidding?" she interrupted. "This is better than it looked when I bought it. How did you even know it could look like this?" I see what cars are supposed to look like, I guess. Under all the wear and damage, there's always the original vision of what the designers intended." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's a very philosophical way to think about car detailing." "I told you it wasn't just washing cars," my father said from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but he'd obviously been listening to the conversation. "My son, he sees things different than most people." It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever heard from him, and I felt my face heat with embarrassment and pleasure. "Well, I'll definitely be back," Victoria said, handing me her payment plus a generous tip. "And I'll be telling everyone I know about this place." As she prepared to leave, she paused. "Actually, I have a question. Do you ever do work off-site? I know some people who might be interested in your services, but they're not going to drive their cars to the south side." Off-site, I hadn't considered mobile detailing. I live in a building downtown with a parking garage. Lots of expensive cars, lots of busy professionals who don't have time to drive across the city for car care. If you could come to them. The idea was intriguing, but I looked back at my father, who was already shaking his head. "We're not a mobile service," he said firmly. "People bring their cars here or they go somewhere else." Victoria looked between us, sensing the tension. "Well, think about it," she said to me specifically. "Here's my card. Call me if you change your mind." After she left, my father and I stood in uncomfortable silence. "Why did you tell her no?" I asked. "Because this is an auto shop, not some fancy service that goes to rich people's houses. We do honest work for honest people. Those would be honest people too. They just happen to have money." Money changes people, Mijo. Makes them think they're better than everyone else. You start chasing that world, you forget who you are. I wanted to argue, but I could see his mind was made up. Roberto Rivera had built his business on solid, working-class principles, and he wasn't interested in adapting to serve customers who lived in a different world. But I couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's suggestion. For the first time, I'd seen a path that might lead somewhere beyond my father's shadow, a way to use the skills I'd developed to build something of my own. That night, I called the number on her business card. Marcus, Victoria's voice sounded surprised when she answered. I wasn't sure you'd call. I've been thinking about your suggestion, I said, packing around my small apartment above the shop. The mobile detailing idea. And I'm interested, but I'd have to do it on my own time, weekends maybe. My father, he's not ready to expand in that direction. There was a pause. Would that be a problem for you, working independently? It would be a huge problem, actually. My father barely tolerated my college education and my focus on detailing work. Starting what amounted to a side business serving wealthy customers would be seen as the ultimate betrayal of everything he'd built. I can handle it, I said, with more confidence than I felt. Great, I've already mentioned your work to a few people in my building. When could you start? That Saturday, I loaded my personal truck with supplies and drove downtown to Victoria's building. The Metropolitan was a gleaming high-rise in River North, the kind of place where the monthly parking fee probably cost more than most people's rent. Victoria met me in the parking garage, wearing jeans and a Northwestern University sweatshirt that somehow managed to look more expensive than most people's formal wear. You look different, she said, studying my face. Different how? Nervous? Are you okay with this? I wasn't actually. The parking garage was filled with cars that cost more than I'd make in several years. Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghini vehicles so expensive I was afraid to breathe on them wrong. But Victoria had lined up 3 customers for my first day, and I couldn't afford to back out now. I'm fine, I lied. The first car was a black Porsche 911 belonging to a hedge fund manager who barely looked up from his phone while explaining what he wanted. The second was a silver Mercedes AMG owned by a real estate developer who spent 20 minutes detailing every scratch and imperfection he wanted addressed. But it was while working on the third car, a red Audi R8 owned by a tech entrepreneur, that Victoria and I really started talking. You know, she said, watching me carefully polish the Audi's carbon fiber trim, I've been thinking about what you said last week, about seeing what cars are supposed to look like under all the damage. What about it? I think you do the same thing with people. I looked up from my work. What do you mean? When I first came to your shop, I was having the worst day. Client meeting had gone badly, I was stressed about a project deadline, my car looked terrible, and I was taking it out on everyone around me. But you didn't treat me like a difficult customer. You treated me like someone who just needed help. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she wasn't wrong. I'd learned from years of dealing with my father's moods that sometimes people's harsh exterior was just a protection against disappointment or frustration. Most people see me as this uptight downtown professional who has her life figured out, Victoria continued. But you just saw someone who needed her car fixed. Do you have your life figured out, I mean? She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. God, no. I work 70 hours a week at a job I'm good at but don't love, live alone in an expensive apartment that doesn't feel like home, and my last relationship ended because I was too career-focused to make time for anything else. That doesn't sound so bad. I mean, at least you're successful. Success is relative, she said, leaning against a concrete pillar. What's your definition of success? The question caught me off guard. I don't know, making my father proud, I guess, proving I'm worthy of the family business. And if you can't do that? Then I don't know what I am. Victoria studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You know what I think? I think you're already successful, you just don't recognize it. I've never seen anyone care about their work the way you care about those cars. That passion, that attention to detail. Most people never find work that engages them like that. My father doesn't see it that way. Your father built his business through hard work and mechanical skill. Those are admirable qualities, but you're building something different. You're an artist who happens to work with cars. No one had ever described my work as artistic before. To my father, I was just the college boy who wasn't tough enough for real automotive work. To our regular customers, I was Roberto's kid who was good at making cars shiny. But Victoria saw something different. Over the following weeks, our professional relationship gradually became something more personal. She started timing her errands to coincide with my weekend visits to her building. We'd grab coffee after I finished working, and she'd tell me about her high-pressure job at the marketing firm while I described the challenges of working for a father who would never be satisfied with my efforts. "Why don't you just start your own business?" she asked one afternoon as we sat in a cafe near her building. "With what money? And doing what? I don't have the mechanical skills to compete with established shops." "But you do have skills they don't have. Your detailing work is better than anything I've seen, and you understand customer service in a way that most mechanics don't." My father would never forgive me. "For what?" "For using your talents to build something of your own." The conversation planted a seed I couldn't ignore. For the first time in my life, I was making good money doing something I was genuinely talented at. The mobile detailing was bringing in more per hour than I made at the shop, and word was spreading through Victoria's professional network. I had more potential customers than I could handle working only weekends. But the idea of leaving my father's business felt like abandoning everything I'd worked toward for 28 years. "You're scared," Victoria observed during another coffee conversation. "Of what?" "Of finding out that you're actually good at something. Of discovering that you don't need your father's approval to be successful." She was right, but admitting it felt like admitting weakness. "It's easier to stay where you are and feel sorry for yourself than it is to take a risk and possibly fail," she continued. "But Marcus, you're already failing. You're failing to live up to your own potential." That night, I lay awake thinking about her words. Was I staying at the shop because I genuinely wanted to earn my father's respect, or because it was easier than facing the possibility of failing on my own? The answer came to me around 3 a.m. I was afraid of succeeding. If I built my own business and thrived, it would prove that I'd wasted years trying to fit into a role that was never right for me. It would mean accepting that my father and I might never understand each other, never share the bond I'd always dreamed of. But it would also mean finally becoming the man I was supposed to be, rather than the son I thought he wanted. By October, my weekend mobile detailing business had evolved into something much more significant. I was booked solid every Saturday and Sunday, working on cars belonging to lawyers, doctors, executives, and entrepreneurs. Word had spread through Victoria's network and beyond, and I was earning more in 2 days than I made during the week at my father's shop. More importantly, I was building something that was entirely mine. Every satisfied customer, every referral, every 5-star online review was proof that I could succeed without Roberto's guidance or approval. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely confident about my abilities. Victoria had become more than just the person who'd introduced me to this world. She'd become my closest friend, my business advisor, and increasingly, something more complicated than either of us wanted to acknowledge. "You should see yourself when you work," she told me one Saturday evening as we sat in her apartment after I'd finished detailing cars in her building's garage. "You get this focused intensity, like nothing else in the world exists except making that car perfect." It's just attention to detail, I said, but I was pleased by her observation. It's more than that, it's like meditation in motion. You lose yourself completely in the work. Her apartment was a study in minimalist sophistication, clean lines, neutral colors, everything perfectly arranged and expensive. It was beautiful but somehow sterile, like a magazine photo rather than a place where someone actually lived. "This doesn't look like you," I said, gesturing around the living room. "What do you mean?" "It's too perfect, too controlled. The Victoria I know is more. I don't know warmer than this." She looked around as if seeing the space through my eyes. "I hired a decorator when I moved in, told her I wanted something that looked successful and professional." "Is that what you wanted, or what you thought you should want?" The question seemed to surprise her. "I'm not sure I know the difference anymore." Over the past few months, I'd learned that Victoria's polished exterior concealed someone much more vulnerable than she let most people see. Her success had come at significant personal cost. She worked constantly, had few close friends, and hadn't been in a serious relationship in over 2 years. "I used to paint," she said suddenly. "Paint what?" "Landscapes, portraits, abstract stuff. I was good at it too. Got into Northwestern on a partial art scholarship." "What happened?" "Reality happened. Art doesn't pay the bills, at least not reliably. So I switched to marketing, which turned out to be just applied creativity with better job security." "Do you miss it?" "Every day." She curled up on her expensive sofa, looking younger and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "I tell myself I'll get back to it someday when I have more time, more financial security. But there's always another project, another deadline, another rung on the ladder to climb." I understood that feeling more than she knew. I'd spent my entire adult life telling myself I'd figure out my own path after I'd earned my father's respect, after I'd proved myself worthy of the family business. But there was always another test, another opportunity to disappoint him, another reason to postpone pursuing what I actually wanted. "Why did you help me get started with the mobile detailing?" I asked. "Because I recognized something in you that I'd lost in myself," she said. "Passion for the work itself, not just what the work could get you. When I watched you detailing my car that first day, I remembered what it felt like to care about something because it mattered to you, not because it impressed other people." That night, sitting in her sterile apartment talking about dreams we'd both abandoned, something shifted between us. The attraction had been building for weeks, but we'd both been careful to maintain professional boundaries. Now, suddenly, those boundaries felt artificial and unnecessary. When I finally kissed her, it wasn't the result of careful planning or romantic calculation. It was the natural conclusion to months of growing intimacy, of shared confidences and mutual understanding. She kissed me back with an intensity that suggested she'd been thinking about this moment as much as I had. "This is probably a mistake," she whispered afterward. "Probably," I agreed. "We're from completely different worlds. Maybe that's not as important as we think it is." She traced her finger along my jawline. "Your father's going to hate this." "My father hates most things about me already. This won't change that." What started that night was unlike any relationship I'd ever experienced. Victoria was sophisticated where I was simple, educated in ways that made my community college degree seem quaint, comfortable in social situations that left me feeling awkward and out of place. But none of that seemed to matter when we were alone together. She showed me parts of Chicago I'd never explored, art galleries, theater districts, restaurants where the wine cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a month. In return, I introduced her to my world, family barbecues where conversation flowed in rapid Spanish and English, neighborhood bars where everyone knew each other's stories, the simple pleasure of working with your hands to create something beautiful. "I love watching you with your family," she said after a Sunday dinner at my aunt's house. "You're different around them, more relaxed, more yourself. Which self is that? The one who doesn't constantly worry about whether he's good enough. The one who just enjoys being alive. Our relationship developed quickly, with the intensity that comes from recognizing someone who truly understands you. Within 2 months, we were spending most weekends together. Within 3 months, we were talking about the future in concrete terms. The only complication was my father. Roberto had noticed the changes in my behavior, the improved clothes, the confident way I carried myself, the fact that I was often unavailable for Sunday family dinners because I was working my mobile detailing business. "You're different lately," he observed one afternoon while we worked on a transmission rebuild. "Different how?" "Distracted, like your mind is somewhere else." He wasn't wrong. More and more, I found myself mentally planning my next weekend's work schedule, thinking about Victoria, dreaming about the possibility of making mobile detailing a full-time career. "I've been thinking about expanding the detailing side of the business," I said carefully. "What kind of expanding?" "Mobile service, taking the work to customers instead of having them come here." Roberto set down his wrench and looked at me with the patient expression he reserved for moments when I said something particularly naive. "Mobile service is expensive to set up, hard to manage, and serves customers who aren't loyal. You chase rich people's money, you end up dependent on rich people's whims. It's been working well on weekends." "Weekends?" His expression sharpened. "What weekends?" I realized I'd said too much, but there was no backing down now. "I've been doing some mobile work on Saturdays and Sundays, just to test the market." The silence that followed was longer and more uncomfortable than any we'd shared. "Behind my back," he said finally. "It wasn't behind your back, it was my own time. Using skills I taught you, using equipment you learned to operate in my shop, serving customers who should be coming here instead. Papa, it's not competition. These are people who would never come to a South Side garage anyway. And that's supposed to make it better. My son thinks he's too good for his father's customers." "That's not what I meant." "But it's what you think." Roberto turned back to the transmission, his movements sharp with anger. "College boy meets some rich girl and suddenly he's embarrassed by his family's business." The mention of Victoria surprised me. I'd never told him about her. "How do you know about?" "I'm not blind, Mijo. You think I don't notice the new clothes, the way you check your phone all the time, the fact that you smile when you think no one's watching. There's a woman, and if she's got you doing mobile detailing for rich people, she's probably rich people herself." I wanted to defend Victoria, to explain that she wasn't the shallow, money-obsessed person he was imagining. But I also knew that any defense would only confirm his suspicions. "Her name is Victoria," I said. "And yes, she's successful, but that's not why I care about her." "What does she do?" "She's a marketing director at a downtown firm." Roberto shook his head with the weary disappointment I'd seen so many times before. "Marketing, selling things people don't need to people who can't afford them." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that. And now she's got you thinking you should sell car detailing to people who can afford to pay someone else to wash their cars, while working people can't afford to get their transmissions fixed. That's not fair." "Fair?" Roberto's voice rose with an anger I rarely heard from him. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I spent 35 years building this business so my son could have something stable and honest to inherit? Is it fair that I taught you everything I know about cars so you could use it to chase some fantasy about getting rich?" "I'm not chasing money." "Then what are you chasing? Because it sure as hell isn't the family business your father built for you." The argument ended with both of us retreating to our respective corners of the shop, Roberto focusing on his engines while I cleaned tools with unnecessary vigor. But the damage was done. For the first time, My father had acknowledged that he'd always intended the shop to be my inheritance, and I'd essentially rejected that gift in favor of pursuing something he saw as shallow and mercenary. That night, I told Victoria about the confrontation. "He's scared," she said simply. "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of being left behind. Your father built his entire identity around being the man who could fix anything, who could provide for his family through hard work and skill. Now his son is succeeding in ways he doesn't understand, serving people he doesn't relate to. He probably feels like you're saying his life's work isn't good enough for you." "That's not what I'm saying." "I know that, but it might be what he's hearing." Victoria curled up next to me on her couch, resting her head on my shoulder. "Maybe it's time to have a real conversation with him, not about the business, but about what you both want. What if what we want is incompatible? Then at least you'll know, and you can make your decisions based on reality instead of assumptions." She was right, but the thought of that conversation terrified me. As long as I could believe that someday my father would understand and approve of my choices, I could continue pursuing my own path while maintaining the illusion that I was still the dutiful son. A real conversation would force us both to acknowledge that we might want fundamentally different things from life. By December, Victoria and I had been together for 8 months, and I was more certain than ever that I wanted to build a life with her. She'd become not just my girlfriend but my partner in every sense. She helped me strategize my mobile detailing business, encouraged me to raise my prices, and even designed a professional website that brought in new customers. More importantly, she'd helped me see myself differently. Through her eyes, I wasn't the disappointing son who couldn't live up to his father's expectations. I was an entrepreneur building something valuable, an artist who happened to work with automobiles, a man capable of creating success on his own terms. The idea of proposing had been building in my mind for weeks. I'd been saving money from my weekend work, researching rings, planning the perfect moment. But I wanted to do it right, in a way that honored both her sophistication and my heritage. I chose New Year's Eve at the same coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation months earlier. Not glamorous, but meaningful to us. "Victoria," I said, getting down on one knee as midnight approached, "you've shown me who I really am, not who I thought I was supposed to be. You've made me braver, more confident, and happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" The ring was modest, a single-carat diamond on a simple platinum band, representing nearly all my savings from the mobile detailing business. But when she saw it, Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." The rest of that night was a blur of champagne, phone calls to friends, and excited planning for our future. We talked about a summer wedding, about combining our resources to grow the detailing business, about the life we'd build together. But there was one conversation we couldn't avoid. "I need to tell my father," I said as we lay in bed the next morning. "Are you worried about his reaction?" "Terrified would be more accurate." Victoria propped herself up on her elbow, studying my face. "Marcus, you're 28 years old. You don't need your father's permission to get married." "I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I still want his blessing. I still want him to be happy for me." "And if he's not?" "Then I guess I'll finally know where I stand." I waited until the following Sunday, when the shop was closed and we could talk without the distraction of work. Roberto was in his office doing paperwork when I knocked on the door. "Papa, I need to tell you something important." He looked up from his invoices, probably expecting another conversation about the mobile detailing business. "I'm getting married." For a long moment, Roberto just stared at me. Then he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "To the marketing girl. Her name is Victoria, and yes. Have you thought this through?" "Of course I have." "What do you know about marriage, Mijo? What do you know about building a life with someone?" The questions stung, because they implied I was too immature or inexperienced to make such a decision. I know I love her. I know she makes me a better person. I know we understand each other. Understanding is easy when everything is going well. Marriage is about what happens when things go wrong. When money gets tight, when someone gets sick, when dreams don't work out the way you planned. We've talked about all of that. Have you? Have you talked about what happens when her fancy downtown job disappears? Have you talked about what happens if your mobile detailing business fails and you need to come back to real work? Have you talked about raising children who will be caught between two worlds that don't understand each other? Each question hit like a physical blow, mainly because they echoed doubts I'd been trying to suppress. You don't even know her, I said defensively. I know she's got you thinking you're too good for this place. I know she's convinced you to start a business that serves people who look down on families like ours. I know she's made you dissatisfied with everything your father built for you. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Marcus, but love should be. Love should make you want to be the best version of yourself, not a different person entirely. What if the best version of myself isn't the person you want me to be? Roberto stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the shop floor. When you were little, you used to help me in the evenings. You couldn't hold the heavy tools, but you would organize parts, clean work surfaces, keep track of screws and bolts. You were happy to be useful, proud to be part of something bigger than yourself. I remember. That little boy understood something that this man has forgotten. He understood that being part of a family means putting the family first, even when you want something different for yourself. And if putting the family first means giving up my own happiness, then you learn to find happiness in making sacrifices for people you love. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and also the most painful. My father wasn't being cruel or manipulative. He genuinely believed that marrying Victoria and pursuing mobile detailing represented a betrayal of family loyalty and working-class values. But I also realized something in that moment. His definition of family loyalty required me to become smaller, to limit my ambitions, to accept his judgment about what kind of life I should want. I'm going to marry her, Papa, with or without your blessing. Roberto nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Then I guess we both know where we stand. I left the shop that day knowing that something fundamental had changed between us. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, acknowledged a gulf that couldn't be bridged by good intentions or compromise. When I told Victoria about the conversation, she held me while I cried for the relationship with my father that had never existed and now never would. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to come between you and your family. You didn't come between us. You just helped me see that we were never as close as I thought we were. Despite my father's disapproval, the early months of our engagement were some of the happiest of my life. Victoria and I threw ourselves into wedding planning with the same intensity we brought to everything else, and I was amazed by how naturally we worked together as a team. She handled the venues, catering, and decorations with the organizational skills that made her successful in her marketing career. I focused on the guest list, music, and photography, drawing on relationships I'd built through years in the automotive community. We compromised on everything: a church ceremony that honored my Catholic upbringing, followed by a reception at an upscale downtown venue that reflected her professional world. More importantly, we spent hours talking about our future together. Victoria had convinced me to make mobile detailing my full-time career, and we developed a business plan that would allow me to leave my father's shop by the end of the summer. You're already making more money on weekends than most people make full-time, she pointed out as we reviewed financial projections on her laptop. If you could work 5 days a week, you'd triple your income within a year. It's scary to give up the security of a steady paycheck. It's scarier to spend your whole life wondering what you could have accomplished if you'd taken the risk. Victoria understood business in ways that constantly impressed me. She'd helped me develop pricing strategies, create professional marketing materials, and establish systems for scheduling and customer management. With her guidance, what had started as weekend car washing was evolving into a legitimate luxury service business. But the real breakthrough came when she suggested we approach her company about a corporate contract. Ashford and Associates has a fleet of cars for executives, she explained over dinner one evening. BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, exactly the kinds of vehicles you specialize in. What if we pitched them on a regular detailing contract? Would they be interested? They're currently using a service that costs twice what you charge and delivers half the quality. If I can get you a meeting with our facilities manager, you could land a contract worth more than your father's shop makes in a month. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in March at Ashford and Associates' downtown headquarters. I'd never been in an office building like that, 30 floors of glass and steel, marble lobbies, conference rooms with views of Lake Michigan. Victoria met me in the lobby, wearing the kind of tailored business suit that made her look like she belonged in this world of corporate power and financial sophistication. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified?" "Don't be, just be yourself. Show them the same passion and professionalism you show all your customers." The meeting went better than I dared hope. The facilities manager, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Chen, had been frustrated with their current detailing service for months. When I showed her photos of my work and explained my approach to automotive care, she was visibly impressed. "When could you start?" she asked. "As soon as you need me to." "How about Monday?" The contract was worth $15,000 per month, more than I'd ever made in my life. It would also give me regular access to Victoria's workplace, opportunities to meet other potential corporate clients, and the financial security to leave my father's shop. As Victoria and I celebrated that evening, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. I had meaningful work that used my talents, a woman who understood and supported my ambitions, and a clear path toward financial independence. "I'm proud of you," Victoria said as we shared a bottle of champagne in her apartment. "You took a huge risk and it paid off." "We took the risk," I corrected. "None of this would have happened without you." "That's what partners do. We help each other become the best versions of ourselves." That night, as I held Victoria in her expensive downtown apartment, surrounded by the life we were building together, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. My father's disapproval still hurt, but it no longer defined my sense of self-worth. I was becoming the man I'd always been meant to be, rather than the son I'd thought he wanted. What I didn't know was that, while I was building my new life, the foundation of everything I believed was about to crumble. The corporate contract required me to spend 3 days a week at Ashford and Associates, working in their parking garage while Victoria was upstairs handling her marketing responsibilities. It should have been the perfect arrangement. We could see each other during lunch breaks, coordinate our schedules, and share the excitement of our respective professional successes. Instead, it became the setup for the most devastating betrayal of my life. It started with small things I didn't think to question. Victoria would mention conversations with my father that seemed surprisingly detailed for someone he allegedly couldn't stand. She'd bring up specific aspects of the shop's operation that I'd never discussed with her. She'd suggest I invite him to the wedding despite his obvious disapproval of our relationship. "I think you're underestimating his capacity for change," she said one evening when I expressed doubt about including him in our celebration. "People can surprise you when they're faced with the reality of losing someone they love." "How do you know so much about his psychology?" "I don't. I just think family relationships are more complicated than we usually give them credit for." When Victoria suggested she should meet with Roberto to discuss wedding plans, I was skeptical but ultimately agreeable. If she could somehow bridge the gap between us, it would solve the biggest remaining problem in our otherwise perfect relationship. What would you talk to him about? Practical things. Catering numbers, seating arrangements, maybe some of the cultural traditions I don't fully understand. I want to make sure we honor your family's customs. Her interest in our traditions was touching, especially since my father had made no effort to understand or appreciate her world. Maybe she could succeed where I'd failed, finding common ground that would allow us all to move forward together. When were you thinking of meeting with him? Maybe next week. I could stop by the shop one evening after work. I should have insisted on being present for that conversation. I should have recognized that Victoria was showing an unusual level of interest in a man she'd never met, who'd been nothing but hostile toward our relationship. I should have paid attention to the subtle changes in her behavior over the following weeks. Instead, I was too focused on my own success to notice that the two most important people in my life were developing a relationship that had nothing to do with me. The first sign that something was wrong came in April, about 3 weeks after Victoria's initial meeting with my father. I'd been working in the Ashford and Associates parking garage when I realized I'd forgotten to bring a specific polish I needed for a client's black BMW. "I'll run over to the shop and grab it," I told Victoria during my lunch break. "Should only take 20 minutes. "Now?" she asked, checking her watch with what seemed like unusual concern. "The client is picking up his car at 3. I need to finish the paint correction before then." "Maybe you could use a different polish, or call your father and ask him to bring it here." "Victoria, it's a 10-minute drive. I'll be back before you finish your afternoon meetings." Something in her expression made me pause. "Is there a problem?" "No, of course not. I was hoping we could have lunch together." "We can have dinner together. This is important." When I arrived at Rivera's auto repair, I expected to find my father working alone in his usual concentrated silence. Instead, I heard voices coming from the office, my father's familiar baritone, and a woman's laugh that made my blood freeze. Victoria was there, sitting in the chair across from Roberto's desk, looking more relaxed and comfortable than I'd ever seen her in the garage environment. They were sharing coffee and what appeared to be an intimate conversation, their body language suggesting a familiarity that couldn't have developed during a single meeting about wedding plans. I stood in the doorway for several seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Victoria noticed me first, her face flushing with what looked like guilt. "Marcus," she said, standing up quickly, "I thought you were working at the office today." "I came to get some polish. What are you doing here?" "We were discussing arrangements for the reception," my father said, but his tone lacked conviction. "What arrangements? We've already finalized everything with the caterer." Victoria and Roberto exchanged a look that made my stomach clench with suspicious dread. "We were talking about the processional music," Victoria said. "Your father has some thoughts about incorporating traditional Mexican elements." It was plausible, but something felt off. My father had shown no interest in wedding planning details, and Victoria had never mentioned returning to the shop for additional meetings. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "About an hour," Victoria admitted. An hour was a long time to discuss processional music. An hour was a long time for my father to spend with anyone he disliked as much as he claimed to dislike her. I retrieved the polish I'd come for and left without further conversation, but my mind was racing. Victoria's unexpected presence at the shop, her reluctance to have me interrupt my work schedule, the comfortable familiarity between her and Roberto, none of it made sense unless there was something I wasn't being told. Over the following days, I found myself paying closer attention to details I'd previously ignored. Victoria's schedule seemed to have more gaps than usual. She'd mentioned running errands or meeting friends at times when she'd previously been completely focused on work. Her phone, which used to sit carelessly on tables and counters, was now always face down or tucked away in her purse. More troubling were the changes in how she talked about my father. "Roberto really is a remarkable man," she said one evening as we prepared dinner in her kitchen. "I had no idea how much skill and knowledge it takes to run an automotive repair business." "Since when do you call him Roberto? You've always referred to him as your father." "He asked me to use his first name, said it felt more respectful than Mr. Rivera." "That's unusual for him. Maybe you underestimate his capacity for warmth." The comment struck me as odd, mainly because warmth had never been a characteristic I associated with my father. Roberto was many things: hardworking, honest, technically skilled, dedicated to his family. But warm, that wasn't a word anyone would use to describe him. Unless, of course, Victoria was seeing a side of him that he'd never shown to me. My suspicions crystallized during a family barbecue at my aunt's house in May. Victoria had been invited, but claimed she had to work late on a project deadline. I'd been disappointed but understanding. Her career demands were intense, and we'd both made sacrifices to accommodate our professional responsibilities. But when I arrived at the party, my cousin Alina pulled me aside with a concerned expression. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm only telling you because I care about you." "What is it?" "I saw Victoria yesterday afternoon. She was at that little Mexican restaurant on 26th Street, the one near Uncle Roberto's shop. She was with a man." My heart started beating faster. "What man?" I couldn't see him clearly. They were sitting in the back booth and his back was toward me. But Marcus, they looked close, like intimate close, holding hands across the table, leaning in to whisper to each other. "Are you sure it was Victoria?" "Positive." I almost went over to say hello, but something about the situation felt private. I didn't want to interrupt. Alina's description matched my worst fears, but I forced myself to consider innocent explanations. Victoria could have been meeting a client, a friend, anyone. The intimate body language Alina described could have been misinterpreted from a distance. But the restaurant was less than 2 blocks from my father's shop. That night, I confronted Victoria as gently as I could manage. "Alina thought she saw you at Rico's yesterday afternoon. She said you were with someone." Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally, defensiveness. "Rico's? I've never been to Rico's." "It's the Mexican place near my father's shop." "Why would I be there?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." "Marcus, your cousin is mistaken. Yesterday afternoon I was in meetings until 6, then went straight home. You can check my calendar if you want." She pulled out her phone and showed me her work schedule, which did indeed show back-to-back meetings through the afternoon. But calendar entries could be deleted or modified, and Alina had been very specific about what she'd seen. "Maybe she saw someone who looked like me," Victoria suggested. "Or maybe she's trying to cause problems between us for some reason." "Alina doesn't even know you well enough to want to cause problems." "Then she made an honest mistake." Victoria's explanation was reasonable, but something in her manner made me doubt her sincerity. She was answering my questions too quickly, too defensively, like someone who'd rehearsed her responses. "I believe you," I said, though I wasn't sure I did. But doubt, once planted, grows in the dark spaces of a relationship. Over the next 2 weeks, I found myself paying obsessive attention to Victoria's schedule, her mood changes, her phone habits. I started noticing things that might have been innocent but felt significant: the way she smiled when reading text messages, her sudden interest in learning Spanish phrases, her insistence on meeting my father for additional wedding planning sessions. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late May. Victoria had told me she was working late on a major client presentation, but when I called her office at 8 p.m., her assistant said she'd left at 5:30. My hands were shaking as I drove to my father's shop. If Victoria was lying about where she was, and if she'd been meeting secretly with Roberto, there was only one explanation that made sense, though it was so devastating I could barely allow myself to think it. The shop was officially closed, but I could see lights on in the back office. Roberto's truck was parked in its usual spot, but next to it sat Victoria's white BMW, the same car I'd detailed with such care and pride 9 months earlier. I let myself in through the side entrance, moving quietly toward the office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices, intimate, quiet conversation between two people who believed they were completely alone. What I saw through the gap in the door destroyed everything I'd believed about my life. Victoria and my father were locked in an embrace that left no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't a friendly hug or a moment of comfort. It was the desperate, passionate kissing of two people who'd been denying their attraction for too long and had finally surrendered to it. My father's hands were tangled in Victoria's hair, her business blazer discarded on his desk. Their bodies pressed together with an urgency that made it clear this wasn't their first intimate moment. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. These were the two most important people in my life, the man whose approval I'd spent 28 years chasing, and the woman I'd planned to marry in 3 months. They broke apart suddenly, perhaps sensing my presence. When Victoria saw me standing there, the color drained from her face. "Marcus," she gasped, but I was already turning away. I made it to my truck before the nausea hit. I sat in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel and trying to breathe, while my entire understanding of reality collapsed around me. Behind me, I could hear raised voices from the shop, Victoria and Roberto arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. Minutes later, Victoria appeared at my driver's side window, her face streaked with tears and smeared makeup. "Marcus, please, let me explain." I rolled down the window, but couldn't bring myself to look at her. "How long?" I asked. "It's not what it looked like." "How long, Victoria?" Her silence was answer enough. "Since the first meeting about wedding plans." "Marcus, you have to understand." "Answer the fucking question. How long have you been sleeping with my father?" The profanity seemed to shock her. I'd never spoken to her harshly before, never used language that crude in her presence. 2 months, she whispered. 2 months. While I'd been planning our future, building a business with her guidance, celebrating the corporate contract that was supposed to launch my independent career, she'd been having an affair with the man whose approval had defined my entire sense of self-worth. "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Victoria was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streams. "It just happened. We were spending time together, talking about the wedding, about you, and we realized we had more in common than either of us expected." "What could you possibly have in common?" "We both love you, Marcus. We both want what's best for you, even if we disagree about what that means. And somewhere in those conversations, we started to understand each other, to appreciate each other's perspectives." "So you decided to fuck each other." She flinched at my crude language. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned or calculated. It just evolved." Evolved. I repeated the word like it tasted bitter. 2 months of evolution while I planned our wedding. "The feelings I have for you are real," she said desperately. "Everything between us has been real. This thing with Roberto doesn't change that." "This thing?" I finally looked at her directly. "You're talking about an affair with my father like it's a minor misunderstanding." "I know it's complicated." "Complicated?" I started laughing, though nothing about this was funny. "My fiancée is fucking my father and you think that's complicated?" The laugh seemed to frighten her more than my anger had. Marcus, please don't do anything reckless. We can work through this. We can figure out how to move forward. Move forward? Are you insane? You think there's a version of the future where I marry you after this? I think there's a version where we all sit down like adults and have an honest conversation about what happened and what it means. I stared at her through the truck window, this beautiful, successful woman who'd convinced me I could be more than my father's disappointing son, who'd helped me build confidence and ambition I'd never possessed. She was suggesting that her affair with Roberto was something we could negotiate our way through, like a business dispute or a scheduling conflict. Victoria, I said quietly, we're done. The engagement is over. The wedding is canceled. I never want to see you again. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. I started the truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see Roberto emerging from the shop, probably coming to comfort the woman who'd chosen him over me. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through Chicago, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. By dawn, I'd made several decisions that would reshape my life completely. First, I was leaving Rivera's auto repair immediately, not just to start my own business, but to sever all ties with the man who'd betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Second, I was keeping every client, every contact, and every business relationship I'd built through the mobile detailing operation. Victoria might have helped me develop those connections, but I'd earned them through my own work and skill. Third, I was moving out of the apartment above the shop and finding a place where neither Victoria nor Roberto could find me easily. I spent Friday morning looking at rental properties, finally settling on a small but clean apartment in Wicker Park, far enough from the shop and Victoria's downtown world to give me space to think. I spent Friday afternoon moving my belongings, which was depressing easy since I'd never accumulated much beyond work clothes and basic furniture. Friday evening, I returned to the shop one final time to collect my tools and any equipment that belonged to me personally. Roberto was waiting. "Mijo," he said as I entered, "we need to talk." "No, we don't." I walked past him toward my work area, where I began loading my detailing supplies into plastic containers. "What happened yesterday? It's complicated." That word again. I continued packing without looking at him. Seems like everyone thinks this situation is just really complicated instead of what it actually is. What do you think it actually is? I turned to face him for the first time since discovering the affair. I think it's the most selfish, cruel thing two people could do to someone they claim to love. Roberto's face hardened with the defensive anger I'd seen whenever his judgment was questioned. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me. Explain how you and my fiancée decided to have an affair while I was planning our wedding. Explain how that serves my best interests, since you both claim to love me so much." She came to me confused about your relationship, worried that you were changing into someone she didn't recognize. We talked about it, tried to figure out how to help you find balance between your old life and the new one you were building. And somewhere in those conversations, you decided to sleep with her. It wasn't planned, Marcus. It wasn't something either of us wanted to happen, but we understood each other in ways that surprised us both. I resumed packing my tools, focusing on the familiar task rather than on my father's attempts to justify the unjustifiable. "She's more like me than you realize," Roberto continued. "She understands what it means to build something from nothing, to work for everything you have. She appreciates things you take for granted." "What things?" "Family loyalty, respect for tradition, understanding that some things matter more than money or status." The irony was breathtaking. My father was defending his affair with my fiancée by claiming they shared traditional values and family loyalty. And you expressed this shared appreciation by betraying your son. We never meant for you to get hurt. But you knew I would get hurt. You knew that what you were doing would destroy me if I found out. You just hoped I wouldn't find out." Roberto was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, "we hoped you wouldn't find out." It was the first completely honest thing he'd said since I'd discovered them together. "Victoria wants to talk to you," he said. "She wants to explain her feelings, help you understand that this doesn't have to end your relationship with her." "My relationship with her ended the moment she decided to sleep with you." "She loves you, Marcus. What happened between us doesn't change that." I finished loading the last of my equipment and closed the container. "Papa, let me ask you something. If Mama had cheated on you with someone you trusted, someone important in your life, would you have stayed with her?" The question seemed to surprise him. "That's different." "How is it different?" "Your mother and I, we had been married for 20 years when she died. We had history, children, a life built together. So the only reason you wouldn't forgive adultery is because you'd invested too much time to start over." "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant. You're suggesting I should forgive Victoria because we haven't invested enough in our relationship for it to matter that she betrayed me." I headed toward the door, carrying the containers that held everything I personally owned from 28 years of working in this shop. "Where are you going?" Roberto asked. "To start my own business, to build something you can't take away from me." "Marcus, be reasonable. You're angry right now, not thinking clearly. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions." I stopped at the door and looked back at him one final time. "Papa, this isn't temporary emotion. This is permanent clarity. I finally understand exactly what I mean to you and exactly what kind of man you are." "What kind of man am I?" "The kind who fucks his son's fiancée and then lectures him about family loyalty." I left Rivera's auto repair that night and never returned. Starting over at 28 felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I had no safety net, no family business to fall back on, no father whose approval I was desperately seeking. I had my skills, my work ethic, and a burning determination to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. The first month was brutal. I'd lost the corporate contract with Ashford and Associates. Victoria had made sure of that, claiming there were conflicts of interest that made my services no longer appropriate for the company. I'd also lost access to her professional network, which had been a major source of referrals. But I'd underestimated the loyalty of my individual customers. Word spread quickly through Chicago's car enthusiast community that Rivera's son had started his own mobile detailing business, and many of my regular clients followed me. They didn't care about the family drama, they cared about the quality of my work. I named the business Precision Auto Detailing, focusing on the meticulous attention to detail that had always been my strength. I invested in higher quality equipment, developed relationships with wholesale suppliers, and created a brand identity that emphasized craftsmanship and reliability. More importantly, I discovered that I was a natural entrepreneur. Without my father's skeptical oversight or Victoria's well-meaning advice, I made decisions quickly and intuitively. I expanded into paint correction services, ceramic coating applications, and high-end restoration work that commanded premium prices. Within 6 months, I was earning more money than I'd ever made at Rivera's auto repair. Within a year, I'd hired 2 employees and purchased a custom-equipped trailer that allowed me to provide showroom-quality service at customers' locations. The success felt good, but it wasn't the hollow victory I'd expected. I wasn't building this business to spite Roberto or to prove Victoria wrong. I was building it because I genuinely loved the work and was good at it. For the first time in my life, my sense of self-worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I also discovered that I was attractive to women in ways I'd never realized. Success and confidence, it turned out, were more appealing than I'd understood during my years of insecurity and self-doubt. I met Sarah Chen at a car show in suburban Chicago, where I'd been hired to detail vehicles for several exhibitors. She was a veterinarian who owned a modified Subaru WRX that she'd brought to display in the import section. "That's beautiful work," she said, watching me apply a final coat of wax to a customer's Porsche 911. "Thank you. I've been looking for someone who understands how to work on modified cars. Most dealers don't know how to handle aftermarket parts without damaging them." Sarah was different from Victoria in every way that mattered. Where Victoria was polished and sophisticated, Sarah was approachable and genuine. Where Victoria saw cars as status symbols, Sarah understood them as expressions of personality and mechanical artistry. We started talking about automotive culture, and I found myself explaining the philosophical aspects of detailing that I'd never been able to articulate to Victoria. "You don't just clean cars," Sarah observed after I described my approach to paint correction. "You restore them to their intended condition." Exactly. Every car has an ideal version of itself, and my job is to reveal that. That's a very Buddhist way of thinking about automotive work. Sarah was beautiful in an understated way, Asian features, intelligent eyes, the kind of natural prettiness that didn't require expensive clothing or professional makeup to be striking. But more importantly, she understood passion for craft in a way that Victoria never had. We started dating casually, meeting for coffee after car shows or grabbing dinner when our schedules aligned. There was no pressure, no timeline, no discussion of long-term commitment. After the intensity and drama of my relationship with Victoria, Sarah's relaxed approach to romance was exactly what I needed. "You seem happy," she told me one evening as we shared pizza at a neighborhood restaurant near her veterinary clinic. "I am happy. That's new for me." New how? I found myself telling her about my family situation, though I kept the details vague. I spent most of my life trying to earn my father's approval. When that didn't work out, I had to figure out who I was without his validation. "And who are you?" "Someone who's good at what he does. Someone who takes pride in quality work. Someone who doesn't need anyone else's permission to be successful." Sarah smiled. "I like that person." So did I, as it turned out. For the first time in my adult life, I was living authentically, making decisions based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. While my life was improving dramatically, Roberto and Victoria's situation was deteriorating just as rapidly. I heard updates through family members who still maintained relationships with both sides, and the news was consistently bad. Victoria had quit her job at Ashford and Associates within 2 months of our breakup, apparently unable to handle the professional complications that arose from her affair with a vendor's family member. Without her substantial salary, she'd been forced to move out of her expensive downtown apartment and into a modest place in a less fashionable neighborhood. More problematically, she developed a reputation in Chicago's marketing community for unprofessional conduct. Word had spread about her involvement in a messy personal situation that affected business relationships, and potential employers were reluctant to take risks on someone with questionable judgment. Roberto's situation was even worse. The automotive repair industry in Chicago was built on personal relationships and community trust. When word spread that Rivera had betrayed his own son, many longtime customers began taking their business elsewhere. "People don't like what your father did," my Uncle Carlos told me during one of our occasional phone conversations. "They think a man who would steal his son's woman can't be trusted with their cars." The Hispanic automotive community was particularly harsh in their judgment. In our culture, family loyalty was sacred, and Roberto's actions were seen as a fundamental violation of everything that made a man worthy of respect. By the end of my first year in business, Rivera's auto repair was struggling financially. Roberto had been forced to lay off his longtime mechanic and was working alone, handling fewer customers with longer wait times for basic services. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. I'd expanded to include paint protection film installation, which commanded premium prices and attracted customers from across the Midwest. I'd also developed relationships with several high-end dealerships who contracted my services for their pre-delivery preparations. The contrast became even more stark when I hired Roberto's former mechanic, Jose, who'd been looking for work after the layoffs at Rivera's. "Your father is bitter," Jose told me during his first week on my team. "He talks about you like you betrayed him, like you were the one who did something wrong." "What does he say?" "That you're ungrateful, that you turned your back on family for money, that you're trying to destroy the business he built for you." The accusations stung because they revealed how completely Roberto had rewritten history to cast himself as the victim. In his version of events, I was the selfish son who'd abandoned his family obligations to chase wealth and status. But the most difficult part was learning about Victoria's attempts to reconnect with me. She'd been calling my business line regularly, asking to schedule appointments, and then requesting to speak with me personally when my employees tried to handle her service needs. She'd also been showing up at car shows and automotive events where she knew I'd be working, always appearing surprised to see me, and trying to initiate conversations about closure and healing. "She seems desperate," Sarah observed after Victoria had approached us at a charity car show in Oak Park. "Like she's lost something she didn't expect to lose." "She lost the life she thought she wanted," I replied. "Now she's realizing that what she chose instead isn't as satisfying as she expected." "Do you feel sorry for her?" It was a good question. Victoria had made her choice, but the consequences had been more severe than she'd anticipated. Her affair with Roberto had cost her career, her social standing, her financial security, and her relationship with me. She'd gambled everything on a romantic connection that apparently wasn't strong enough to justify the sacrifices. "I feel sorry for the person she used to be," I said finally. "The woman I fell in love with was better than the choices she made." "And your father?" That was a more complicated question. Roberto's betrayal had cut deeper because it represented the final proof that I'd never been the son he wanted. But it had also freed me to become the man I was meant to be. "I don't think about him much anymore," I said, which was mostly true. What I didn't tell Sarah was that I'd been getting reports from family members about Roberto's increasingly desperate situation. Rivera's auto repair was now operating month to month, struggling to pay rent and basic expenses. Roberto had approached several family members about loans, but no one wanted to be associated with his financial problems. More troubling were reports about his personal relationship with Victoria. According to my cousin Alina, they'd been seen arguing publicly at restaurants and community events. Victoria had apparently expected their affair to evolve into a committed relationship, but Roberto seemed to be having second thoughts about the woman who'd cost him his son and his business. "It's like watching a car crash in slow motion," Alina told me. "They're both miserable, but they're too proud to admit they made a mistake." I felt no satisfaction in their suffering. If anything, the reports made me sad for the people they used to be, before they'd made choices that revealed the worst aspects of their characters. But I was also grateful for the clarity their betrayal had provided. Without it, I might have spent my entire life trying to earn approval from people who were never capable of giving it unconditionally. 2 years after I discovered their affair, Roberto called me. I was working in my expanded garage facility. I'd finally saved enough to rent a proper shop space rather than operating purely mobile services, when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. "Marcus," Roberto's voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered. "I need to talk to you." We don't have anything to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes, it's important. Something in his tone made me pause. This wasn't the defensive, self-righteous man who tried to justify his affair 2 years earlier. This was someone who sounded genuinely desperate. What do you want, Papa? I need to apologize, and I need to ask for your help. My help with what? The shop is failing, Marcus. I can't keep up with the work, can't afford to hire anyone, can't compete with the newer places that have better equipment and marketing. I'm going to lose everything your grandfather and I built. What does that have to do with me? You could come back. We could be partners, run the business together the way I always planned. Rivera and Son like it should have been. The audacity of the request left me speechless. After betraying me in the most personal way possible, Roberto was asking me to abandon my successful business to save his failing one. You're not serious. I am serious. I made a mistake, Marcus. A terrible mistake that cost me everything that mattered to me, but we could fix it. We could be a family again. What about Victoria? There was a long pause. Victoria and I, that relationship ended months ago. We realized we'd made a mistake, that we'd hurt the person we both cared most about for something that wasn't real. So now that your affair didn't work out, you want me to come back and pretend none of it happened. I want you to come back because you're my son and I love you, and because I need you more than I've ever needed anyone. It was the first time Roberto had ever said he loved me directly, and hearing those words should have meant everything to me. 2 years earlier, they would have meant everything. Now they felt like manipulation. Papa, I said quietly, I'm not coming back. Why not? You've proven your point. You've shown that you can succeed on your own. Now we can work together as equals. It's not about proving a point. It's about building the life I actually want. And what life is that? I looked around my shop, clean, modern, efficiently organized, filled with high-end equipment and expensive cars belonging to customers who sought out my services specifically. Through the office window, I could see Sarah reviewing appointment schedules, her presence adding warmth and partnership to a business that had become an expression of my authentic self. A life where I don't need anyone's approval to feel worthy, I said. A life where I'm valued for who I am, not for who someone else wants me to be. Marcus, please, I know I hurt you, but you didn't just hurt me, Papa. You showed me exactly what kind of man you are when you think no one's watching. You showed me that your love was conditional on my willingness to accept whatever treatment you decided I deserved. That's not true. It is true. You spent my entire life making me feel like I wasn't good enough to inherit your business. Then, when I started building something of my own, you seduced the woman I was planning to marry. You didn't just betray me. You tried to destroy my chance at happiness because you couldn't stand to see me succeed without your permission. Roberto was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I never meant to destroy your happiness. But you did mean to prove that Victoria would choose you over me. You meant to show me that even the woman who loved me recognized that I wasn't as good a man as my father. Marcus, the saddest part is that you succeeded. Victoria did choose you over me, but instead of proving I wasn't worthy of her, it proved that neither of you was worthy of me. I hung up without saying goodbye. An hour later, Sarah found me sitting in my office, staring at financial reports without really seeing them. Everything okay? She asked. My father called. He wants me to come back to his business. Are you considering it? No, but it's strange how much it doesn't tempt me. 2 years ago, having him ask for my help would have been everything I'd ever wanted. Sarah perched on the edge of my desk, and now I realize I never actually wanted his approval. I wanted him to be the kind of father whose approval was worth having. That's a very mature way to think about it. Maturity is easier when you're happy with your own life. Sarah smiled. Are you happy with your own life? I looked at this woman who'd never tried to change me, never demanded that I be someone other than who I was, never used her love as leverage to manipulate my choices. I looked around the business I'd built from nothing, serving customers who sought me out specifically because of my reputation for quality and integrity. Yeah, I said, I really am. Epilogue: the life well chosen. 3 years later, Sarah and I married in a small ceremony at her family's farm outside Chicago. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Victoria and I had planned. No expensive venue, no designer dress, no guest list full of people trying to network with each other. Instead, it was intimate, authentic, and joyful. Sarah's family welcomed me unconditionally, appreciating my work ethic and the obvious happiness I brought to their daughter. My own family members who attended seemed relieved to see me settled with someone who valued the same things they did: loyalty, honesty, and genuine affection. Roberto wasn't invited, though I heard through Elena that he'd asked about it. My business continued to thrive. I'd opened a second location and employed 6 people full-time, specializing in high-end restoration work that attracted customers from across the country. We'd been featured in automotive magazines and had developed partnerships with classic car dealers who relied on our services for their most valuable inventory. More importantly, I'd found work that felt like calling rather than obligation. Every day brought new challenges that engaged my creativity and technical skills. I was building something lasting and meaningful, something that reflected my values and abilities. Sarah had become a true partner in every sense. She understood the demands of running a small business and supported my ambitions without trying to direct them. She'd also helped me heal from the emotional damage of Roberto's betrayal, not through therapy or analysis, but through the simple demonstration that healthy relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine affection. We were expecting our first child, and the pregnancy had forced me to think about the kind of father I wanted to be. I was determined to give our son or daughter the unconditional support and approval I'd never received, while also encouraging them to pursue their own dreams rather than fulfilling my expectations. On a Tuesday morning in spring, exactly 4 years after I discovered Victoria and Roberto together, Elena called with news I'd been expecting for months. Rivera's auto repair closed yesterday, she said. Roberto couldn't make rent anymore, and the landlord evicted him. I felt sad but not surprised. Roberto's betrayal had cost him more than his relationship with me. It had cost him the respect of the community that had sustained his business for 35 years. Where is he now? Living with Aunt Carmen. He's been looking for work at other shops, but nobody wants to hire him. Word got around about what he did, and people don't trust him anymore. And Victoria? She moved back east about 6 months ago. Heard she was working at a small marketing firm in Philadelphia, making about half what she used to make here. The news should have felt like vindication, but mostly it just felt sad. 2 people who'd once been important to me had destroyed their own lives for a relationship that hadn't even lasted 2 years. Marcus, Elena continued, Roberto's been asking family members to convince you to give him a job. He's desperate. What did you tell him? I told him that bridge was burned a long time ago, but he keeps asking like he thinks if enough people pressure you, you'll change your mind. The idea of Roberto working for me, of the man who'd raised me begging for employment from the son whose life he'd tried to destroy, would have been satisfying in a petty way. But I'd moved beyond the need for that kind of revenge. If he calls you again, tell him I wish him well but I can't help him, I said. Tell him I hope he finds work somewhere that appreciates his skills. You're not going to hire him. Elena, I've built something good here, something based on trust, quality work, and treating people with respect. Roberto proved that he doesn't share those values when it matters. I can't risk what I've built to help someone who chose to hurt me when he had other options. After hanging up, I sat in my office thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Roberto's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to stop seeking approval from someone who was never going to give it unconditionally, and to start building a life that reflected my own values and desires. Victoria's affair had shattered my plans for the future, but it had also revealed that those plans had been based on illusions about who she really was. The woman I'd fallen in love with had been partially a projection of who I'd wanted her to be, rather than who she'd actually been. Now I was married to someone who loved me for who I actually was, working at something that engaged my talents and values, building a family based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt me. It was building a life so good that their absence improved it rather than diminished it. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch of our small house in a quiet neighborhood, watching the sun set over the city where I'd grown up. She was reading veterinary journals while I reviewed the next day's appointment schedule, both of us content in the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to perform for each other. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" Sarah asked without looking up from her magazine. "With my father and Victoria. With all of it. The way your family relationship ended, the business you left behind, the years you spent trying to be someone you weren't." I considered the question seriously. There had been real pain in discovering that the people I'd loved most were capable of betraying me so completely. There had been fear in starting over with no safety net. There had been loneliness in the months before I'd met Sarah, when I'd been rebuilding my sense of self from scratch. But there had also been growth, success, and ultimately genuine happiness. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret any of it. Without Roberto's betrayal, I might have spent my whole life trying to earn his approval. Without Victoria's affair, I might have married someone who didn't really understand or value who I am. Everything that hurt led to something better." Sarah looked up from her magazine and smiled. "I'm glad it led you to me." "Me too." As darkness settled over our neighborhood, I thought about the different paths my life could have taken. I could have forgiven Roberto and Victoria, accepted their betrayal as a mistake, and tried to rebuild relationships with people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. I could have returned to work at Rivera's auto repair, accepting a subordinate role in someone else's vision rather than building my own. But I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen to build something new rather than repair something broken. I'd chosen to surround myself with people who valued the same things I did. I'd chosen to measure my worth by my own standards rather than other people's approval. Roberto had taught me valuable lessons about automotive repair, work ethic, and the importance of quality craftsmanship. But he'd also taught me, through his betrayal, about the kind of man I didn't want to be. Victoria had shown me possibilities I'd never imagined, helped me develop confidence and ambition I'd never possessed. But she'd also shown me, through her choices, the importance of character over sophistication. The pain they'd caused had been real and significant, but the life I'd built in response to that pain was better than anything I could have achieved while still seeking their validation. Sometimes the greatest gift people can give you is showing you exactly who they are when they think it doesn't matter. Roberto and Victoria had given me that gift, though they'd never intended it as kindness. And I'd taken that gift and used it to build something beautiful.